Welcome and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, Addressing the Executive Order on Cybersecurity Requirements to Mitigate Risk, with Chief Cybersecurity Technologist for DLT Solutions, Don Maclean. You're also by the Trust Systems Engineering Sisters. Shanta will run through a brief overview of Beyond Trust near the end of the webinar, so please be sure to stick around for that. My name's Tammy Gallegos and I'm your host today. Before we dive into the webinar, I just wanted to touch on a few housekeeping items. First thing, all attendee lines are muted. However, we do want this to be interactive, so I encourage you all to ask your questions via the chat box in the GoToWebinar console. We'll try to cover those questions at the end of the webinar during our Q&A time. Also, today's session is being recorded. As attendees, you'll receive the link to the recording via an email later this week. So at this point, I'd like to turn the phone over to Don Maclean. Don, thanks so much for joining us today. Please take it away.
Thanks, Tammy. So hello, everyone. Thanks for attending today. My name's Don Maclean, and as Tammy indicated, I'm Chief Cybersecurity Technologist for DLT Solutions. We're partnered with Beyond Trust. And just a quick background on me and my company. I won't bore you with the details too much, but DLT focuses on selling technology to the public sector, mostly federal. We also sell to state and local governments and the educational market as well. And my background before I came to DLT 2 years ago was primarily in the world of system integrators. I ran cybersecurity programs in that capacity as a government contractor for various agencies, FAA, Department of Labor, FBI, Department of Justice, and so on. And so I got to see up close and personal what goes on with cybersecurity programs revolving around the compliance efforts, as we'll talk about in large measure with the executive order today, and also some of the engineering and technical aspects as well. Since coming to DLT 2 years ago, my role has been to do events such as this, webinars and speaking engagements, but also to evaluate companies that have new and exciting technologies to offer, or companies that have been in business for a while that are constantly staying ahead of the technology curve, to make sure that the government is aware of those technologies and to promote cybersecurity in general in those areas. So, but enough about me. Let's take a look at the executive order and its requirements. First of all, I'll lay out the general agenda. This is taken from a DHS approach to the executive order, where they lay out what they call 4 work streams: accountability, modernization, vulnerabilities, and transparency. In the accountability piece, we'll look at some of the reporting requirements revolving around risk management, also the identity and privilege management pieces that are required, and the cybersecurity framework, which is not to be confused with the risk management framework you know and love from NIST 800-37 and 800-53 primarily. We'll take a look at the modernization requirements that the executive order mandates, mostly in the general area of shared services, and more specifically in cloud and a couple of other areas. We'll look at what it requires in terms of managing your vulnerabilities and, more importantly, fixing those vulnerabilities. And then finally, we'll take a look at its transparency requirements, which are interesting as well. Before we dig into the details too much, though, let me just talk about how we'll refer to this thing. The formal title is quite a mouthful. Okay, I'll take a deep breath. Presidential Executive Order on Strengthening the Cybersecurity, the cybersecurity of federal networks and critical infrastructure. For short, we're going to either just call it the executive order, or even shorter, the O, just because it's easier to pronounce. If I referred to it by its full name every time, we'd probably hear till next week just hearing me say the name over and over again. So we'll just use the quick and dirty name. So, accountability. The first piece of the accountability work stream is the pardon me, I'm just adjusting a couple of things on my screen here. The first piece of the accountability work stream is the risk management report, and that's due for all agencies to DHS by August 9th, 2017. And I don't normally read from slides, but I will read from this one just very quickly. Each agency shall provide a risk management report to DHS and OMB describing the risk mitigation and acceptance choices made as of the date of the order and the agency's action plan to implement the framework. What's important about that, it describes why agency has accepted risk and what those risks are and why you've accepted them. This is where the accountability comes into the whole risk management piece. My experience in cybersecurity programs was that very often accepting a risk was tantamount to really, well, I hate to say it, ignoring the risk or just not really evaluating it fully. As you all know, in the cybersecurity world, when you encounter a risk, what you can do is you can transfer it, via insurance or asking someone to take it on through some sort of contractual arrangement, sometimes is done through cloud arrangements. You can mitigate the risk, and you can also accept the risk. But the point of accepting the risk is that you're supposed to evaluate on a cost-benefit basis what the risk is and how much the cost of mitigating that risk will be. The classic example is you don't want to pay $10,000 for a safe that holds a $10 item. Easier said than done, though, and quite often in the crush and rush of events, risks are acknowledged but not really fully evaluated. So I think this is an attempt to make sure that you know what risks you're accepting, and you have clearly evaluated and analyzed exactly why you've taken that particular action. And that will take the form of one of many reports that are due back to DHS, but this is the one that each agency has to do. The second piece of the accountability or work stream is the whole world of identity and privilege management. They want you to know who has access to your system. And perhaps I should be more specific and say who has authorized access to your system. As we all know, many people have access to your system that probably shouldn't have it, but what they're really looking for is the authorized list, the official list of people who have access to those systems. When we get into the cybersecurity framework later on, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the issues associated with that. But in addition to knowing who has access, you want to be able to, you'll be required to know what those people can do. Not only who are they, but what are they allowed to do? Can they just look at stuff? Can they alter data? Can they move data? Can they download data? Can they move data to different systems, et cetera, et cetera? And then in terms of identifying breaches and identifying problems, particularly insider threat problems, you'll be required to know what did they do. In other words, all the logging, all of the breadcrumbs and trails that constitute a user's behavior need to be logged and clearly identified so that you know what someone is up to. This has all sorts of ramifications with regard to machine learning and user behavior analysis. If you have a clear idea of what somebody can do, and then you see that they're trying to do something that they can't do, or that they are displaying a different behavior pattern, that's obviously a red flag and can be fed in quite often either to a SIM or a higher end machine learning or intelligence system. In terms, now once you know who has access, what they can do, and what they actually did, if there's a problem, if there's a criminal activity, if there's something suspicious, you need to be able to prove it. That's a little bit of a tougher nut to crack, particularly for systems now that are available from anywhere in the world at any time, like cloud systems. As we all know, clear probative attribution, absolutes, yes and no's, that's difficult in the digital world. It really needs to be preponderance of evidence. So the more evidence you gather, the more information you have, the stronger your case can be. I have actually been engaged in efforts, I won't say where, that gathered that evidence and created a pretty strong circumstantial case against malfeasance and bad behavior by some people in a network. This was an insider threat, a couple of insider threat efforts, and suffice it to say those people are in jail, but it does require very, very careful, very comprehensive and thorough gathering of information on what somebody was up to and what they did during their session on the network. Now, the next piece of the puzzle with regard to the accountability work stream is the requirement to adopt the cybersecurity framework. Now, just to make sure that we're clear on what this framework word means, this is not the risk management framework that you are all accustomed to using, laid out in 800-37 using the controls from 800-53 from NIST. This is not the categorize, select, implement, assess, authorize, and monitor sequence that gives you your authority to operate that you've seen before. This is the cybersecurity framework that was promulgated in 2014 under the previous administration. And it has there's two interesting changes here. The original cybersecurity framework was, number one, aimed at the private sector, not the public sector, and number two, intended to be voluntary. It also, third, or I suppose 2.5, so to speak, is that it's kind of designed to be a maturity model as much as a risk assessment model, although it depends who you talk to. I went back and forth at length with one of the people that wrote this thing, and he insisted it was a maturity model, but I pointed to language in the thing that says this is not a maturity model. But at any rate, you got to use it now. So whether it's a maturity model or a risk management model is really kind of not that important. You got to use it. What's important too is that it is also a well, there are four elements, three main elements to the cybersecurity framework. It has the core functions, which are the actions that you see here: identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. And those verbs, those actions, are to be applied to several components or elements of the network, namely devices, applications, data, users, and networks. And I would add to that cloud services as well, although that's not formally part of the framework. Just to put some meat on the bones of that, you need to be able to identify the devices that are on your network. You need to be able to identify the applications that are running throughout your network. You need to be able to identify, and this gets back to what we were talking earlier with identity and privilege management, the users and what they can do on the network. You need to be able to detect if there's an incident happening to a device, an application, etc. You need to be able to protect those things, respond to events when they occur, and of course recover and get back to business as usual, or business presumably better than usual after an incident occurs. So the other important thing to understand about the cybersecurity framework is that it lays out a set of controls that are actually pretty similar and map pretty readily, on the whole, not always, to the 800-53 control set that you're using. So in that respect, it may not be as heavy a lift as you might think, because it's not that difficult to map the cybersecurity framework controls to the 853 controls. And a number of people have already undertaken efforts to get that done. I've walked down that road a little bit myself. I'm not quite finished yet, but it's not as hard as it might seem. In this element of the framework, this element of the executive order, in my opinion, seems a little bit like extra paperwork, extra bureaucracy. I'm not really sure what it's buying over the assessment efforts that are already in place, but it's there, and it's going to be a requirement, or it is a requirement now. So the next work stream is, second work stream of the four in the executive order, is the modernization work stream. And it specifically calls out shared services and cloud, as well as email and cybersecurity services. What I like about this is that it is a broad mandate to stay up to date. I have seen in cybersecurity programs in federal agencies in general a wide variety of approaches to staying up to date. What I like about this is that it mandates that modernization is an ongoing effort, not a one-off deal or a one-shot deal. In other words, here's a bunch of money, go buy a bunch of new computers, now you're modern. No, it recognizes that technology is just constantly changing, constantly moving forward, constantly accelerating. And so more than just offering or mandating a one-shot attempt or effort to get up to date, it says that you need to have a plan, or agencies need to have a plan for how they're going to stay up to date on a regular basis. The wide variety of modernization that I've seen has ranged from one agency, and in this case, since they're really good, I'll name them, executive offices and U.S. attorneys. They did a complete technology refresh, top to bottom, start to finish, end to end, wall to wall, of all their technology every 18 months, which is very aggressive and efficient. They, I mean, from the desktop machines to the data center, everything was up to date constantly. It was a very, very efficient and aggressive effort, which was extremely impressive. I remember in 2010, Microsoft Exchange 2010 had just put out, and in February, the CIO said, it's February already. How come we don't have Exchange 2010 installed yet? It had been out for 6 weeks, part of which was vacation season. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is that there are agencies, and I won't name these, that are using incredibly old technology. I mean, I'm talking about floppy disks in some cases. I mean, stuff that, like, I didn't even know you could buy floppy disks anywhere. Who even makes them? I wonder about that last company standing that's still making floppy disks, right? And who their market is and how their balance sheet looks. Although I suppose they probably own the whole market because nobody else wants to be in that business. So modernization, my point is that modernization varies widely in the federal government, but this is a good attempt to ensure that agencies, or to try and mandate that agencies stay up to date. I think it's a good attempt. It's going to take a lot to get that done because a lot of the modernization problems have to do with the long procurement cycles in the government, and that is the element that needs to change, and that's not going to happen overnight. It would be great to see the procurement cycles moving faster. I think everyone would win then. The government would be able to get the latest technology faster, and of course, vendors and companies are always glad to get their money faster. That issue, though, is something that is deeply ensconced in regulations, laws, culture, and policy. So that's not going to change easily or readily, but it would be great if it did. I think it's important also to think about one element of modernization with regard to cybersecurity, which is that in most technology areas, the prudent and wise way to approach adoption of a new technology is to let somebody else adopt the early versions and work out the problems, suffer the pain of the initial adoption, find out what's wrong, find out what doesn't work, and then you march in all fat, dumb, and happy, and you start using version 2.0 and all the kinks have been worked out. And that, in general, is a good way to adopt new technology. However, with cybersecurity, it's a little bit different. New technologies in cybersecurity technologies are at their best actually when they're new. Because, and why is that? Well, first of all, the bad guys haven't had time to figure out how to break through it yet. So when you buy a new cybersecurity technology, if it's reasonably decent, bad guys haven't figured it out yet. So that's number one when it's at its best. Also, because it's new, it hasn't, by definition, been widely adopted, which means the bad guys have a smaller incentive or less incentive to break through something that's new and difficult to figure out. Think back to our early part of the discussion where we talked about known vulnerabilities account for so many of the attacks in the actually that's a later part of the seminar of the thing, but known vulnerabilities are a big part of or constitute a big percentage of the successful breaches in the world of cybersecurity. So this whole modernization thing is very important. Also, accelerating the sales cycle would be huge. As huge and difficult an effort as that would be, that would also allow the adoption of these new technologies more readily into the federal workspace. In my capacity as cybersecurity technology in DLT, in addition to working with our top-notch vendors like Beyond Trust, I also look at a lot of young, exciting startup companies, and the big barrier to entry for these new companies is the long sales cycle that it takes to get into the public sector markets. Sometimes they want to get into the market, but it's just like, we can't wait 9 months for our first deal to come through. So that would that would be a huge effort. Even if it works only a little bit, it would work to everyone's advantage. I think it would be a win-win for everybody. But I'm not. I'm also realistic. I know how difficult that effort is going to be. So the next work stream that DHS identified in the executive order is the whole area of vulnerabilities. And these are the executive order mandates. These are much more specific and concrete, and it's interesting just how sort of down in the weeds these mandates are for something that comes from a presidential executive order. Usually they're very broad things like, modernization, stay up to date, come up with a plan for how you're going to stay modern. That's pretty high level. These are really pretty concrete and pretty specific and tactical, which actually I think is a good thing. As I mentioned earlier, so many of the breaches that succeed in the federal government are simply taking advantage of known weaknesses that people haven't bothered to address. But of course, how do you know, or how do you fix a weakness until you know, how do you fix a known weakness if you don't know what it is? In other words, you need to be able to do your vulnerability assessment and scanning and use automated tools as much as possible so that you know what those weaknesses are. And then the second element is to regularly patch. And this is just one of those chronic things that pops up in every single conference, seminar, blog, public communication, private discussion, whatever, is the whole issue of patch management. People so often just don't patch. And the whole WannaCry thing was a non-issue for the users that had kept their systems up to date and patched. And also in terms of modernization, what was required, WannaCry attacked a lot of Windows XP systems. Well, federal government had a lot of Windows XP systems. Fortunately, Microsoft did the right thing and issued a patch after the fact and allowed them to apply that patch to XP to avoid WannaCry. But patch management just helps you avoid so many of those easy shots that they'll take. I mean, hackers are just like, they're humans too. They're going to take the path of least resistance. They're not going to sit there and concoct some new high-tech, highfalutin zero-day when they can just look up a CVE or Google something and come up with a toolkit and buy a toolkit off of the dark web and exploit that. It's much easier to do that. Related also to this whole vulnerability management piece is the topic of configuration management. A big issue in particular with cloud deployments. You want to make sure you know what if you're doing cloud as infrastructure, you want to make sure you know how what infrastructure your cloud code is bringing up, but also with on-prem deployments of technology. It's very important to make sure you know what your configurations are and be able to manage those properly. Okay, now the identity and privilege management piece is a very important element of this whole executive order. And so let's take a little bit closer look at that. Remember that the cybersecurity framework is has those verbs that you're supposed to apply, those core functions: identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. And so first step, of course, is to discover or identify, in this case, all of your privilege, your accounts, particularly your privileged accounts, the people that have the inside track and can really get to the crown jewels. That's always part of the attack sequence, is to gain access and then engage in privilege escalation. Get in the system somehow and then find a way to escalate your privileges. You want to know who has access and what their particularly the privileged accounts and what they can do. Enforcing least privilege is a two-pronged process in my experience. And the hard part, quite honestly, is more of a human issue than it is a technical issue. I was at a conference recently where there was a consultant who had worked with an agency, and his job was to try and make sure that least privilege was followed. Well, the first thing is to figure out what privileges does everybody really need. And as so often the case, he discovered there was one system administrator who had all the keys to all the kingdoms and had admin access to just everything. And the human difficulty is that once someone has that privilege, it becomes part of their well, for want of a better term, identity. It becomes a part of their self-worth, their status in the organization. They feel like they're important. They feel like they matter. Take that away, and you're diminishing their importance and their significance and their value. And that's just psychologically very difficult to do, particularly if that administrator is very good at what they do and is considered a crucial asset to the organization. So deciding exactly what the least privileges should be is one thing, and overcoming the psychological barriers is another. Now, what this consultant did, and I'm not going to say I advocate this, but I will say what he did, was he identified all of the privileges that this guy had, and then he monitored and logged everything that he did on a daily basis, and he discovered, not surprisingly, that this guy used a very small percentage of his privileges on a very small percentage of the systems that he actually used, and he began paring back his access privileges without him even knowing it, until he eventually got to least privilege, and he never actually knew that his privileges had been rescinded. Now, I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm saying that that's kind of a typical situation where people have more privileges than they really need, and probably wouldn't even know if you rescinded the ones that are excessive and gratuitous. The whole identity and privilege management is also a very important, or another very important element of identity and privilege management, of course, is password management. We're seeing a move away from the password for many reasons. Number one, they're difficult to manage. DOJ has recently adopted a program where they're going to eliminate out all passwords. I think they're just going to use, someone can correct me in the audience if I'm wrong, I think they're moving to an all biometric system. I'm not sure, but I think passwords are going to be around for quite some time anyway. And then finally, the whole concept of separating networks, microsegmentation, software-defined networks, and as I've already mentioned, activity monitoring, knowing what people are up to when they're on the network, are important components of that whole identity and privilege management piece that mandated by the executive order. Finally, we have transparency. Now, transparency this part is kind of aimed at the private sector, but also applies to the public sector. The idea is that the executive order would like agencies to share their knowledge and to share their practices and to share what they've discovered and and their threat intelligence as well. The idea here is that security is a team sport. If you hide your dirty laundry, hide the fact that you've been breached, maybe someone has fixed something, has discovered a breach, has fixed it, has fixed a vulnerability, but isn't willing to share because they're embarrassed. Well, that's understandable. We don't want to, trumpet the fact that we've been breached. But I think there is, and this is a subjective judgment, but I think there is a move gradually in the cybersecurity world and the world at large that understands that getting breached doesn't mean shame on you, it means shame on the bad guy. And so if you get breached, it's becoming more acceptable to share the details of the breach, to share how you might have rectified it so that other people can benefit from your experience. And of course, there's a flip side to that. If other people are doing that, then you get to absorb their threat intelligence as well. Everyone wants to share somebody else's threat intelligence. They don't want to share their own. But the executive order at least sets the stage and for that sharing out as well as sharing in. And this includes both discovery of specific vulnerabilities, threat intelligence as is often called, and also just best practices that seem to be working well for you and your organization. And then finally, there's a workforce development piece in the executive order. I'm not going to go into that too much, but basically talking about how important it is to address the whole lack of workforce, well-trained workforce people, or well-trained people in the workforce in cybersecurity. My take on this is that too often cybersecurity is presented as a losing battle. And I think one of the reasons that young, talented people with an interest in technology choose other fields is who wants to join the losing team. If you could, learn all about robotics, if you could learn all about artificial intelligence, if you could learn all about cloud computing and other sort of forward-leaning technologies, those are cool, those are hip, those are obvious, those receive a lot of press. Why would you want to join the team that seems to be losing the battle all the time? I would like to see a more positive spin put on our ability to fight this cybersecurity war. Of course, that requires a few more wins, and right now we're kind of rocked back on our heels. But I think we can get there if we start with presenting the positive things that we might be able to do in cybersecurity. So that, I believe, is my story, and I'm going to stick to it. I think it's time now to drop the mic and hand it over to my partner in crime, Shanta Saunders. Theaters.
Hey, Shanta, so we're going to pass the ball over to you so that you can take us through the Beyond Trust point of view. Thanks so much, Don. That really broke down a complex topic into more manageable components. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Shanta, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Tammy, for the introduction. As Tammy mentioned, my name is Shanta Sherrod Sanders, and I'm a senior engineer here at Beyond Trust, supporting our federal division. Today, we're going to briefly discuss how by deploying Beyond Trust Power Broker, Privilege Access Management, and Retina Vulnerability Management solutions, Beyond Trust can assist you and your team to adhere to the mandates outlined in the presidential executive order Don just discussed. Per this executive order, the president will hold heads of executive departments and agencies or agency heads accountable for managing cybersecurity risk for their enterprises. A big part of this will include identity and privilege management. The fact of the matter is, many times within the federal government, employees, contractors, and vendors are given full reign of federal IT systems and data. This is a problem that needs to be addressed. Per the Verizon 2016 Data Breach Investigations Report, 82% of cases in the report show compromises happening in minutes due to unnecessary access. And 68% of the time, data leakage happens in a matter of days. The only way to put a stop to this type of behavior is by implementing a privilege access management solution that will help you gain insight into who has access to your protected resources and privileged credentials. What can they do with those privileged accounts? What did they do with that access? By monitoring in real time their activity and recording their activity and keystrokes for auditing purposes. So if and when a breach occurs, you can prove it. If a user has administrator access within a network, they basically have the keys to the kingdom. But again, should they have free reign? Managing privileged credentials with greater discipline, in addition to reducing risk and driving accountability over shared accounts, should be a top priority for federal agencies. Whether your IT infrastructure is old or new, shared passwords and shared SSH keys continue to persist across servers, databases, network devices, applications, and the list goes on and on. Again, per the Verizon 2016 Data Breach Investigations Report, privilege abuse was behind 66%. 66% of insider misuse incidents. That's significant. So that begs the question, what can be done? Well, the first step is to invest into a password management solution to address the risk, with the goal being to drive control and accountability over shared accounts and their credentials by onboarding these accounts into a password manager and ensuring that these accounts are only accessed when needed. By implementing an automated password management tool like Beyond Trust Power Broker Password Safe, organizations can effectively find, manage, and monitor all privileged accounts. Beyond Trust Power Broker Password Safe gives federal agencies better control over who has access to privileged accounts. It will provide you with real-time visibility over privileged account usage by recording and controlling when users have access. It will provide assurance that privileged account passwords and SSH keys are randomized per your outlined security policy. And it will automatically rotate passwords on any hardware or application. Per the executive order, modernization is to be an ongoing effort within the federal government, which includes a cloud aspect. Many customers I talk to within federal organizations are either seriously considering moving some resources or workloads to the cloud, or have already moved some resources to a cloud environment. Now, when I say cloud environment, I'm referring to private on-premise cloud environments as well as public cloud environments. Those resources that are moved to the cloud still need to be secured, and many federal agencies are seeing firsthand that many traditional security tools are architected for on-premise environments. And when extended to the cloud or across hybrid environments, these tools leave gaps that allow for excessive privileged access and permissions. BeyondTrust helps fill those gaps by providing a comprehensive, multi-layered approach to password management, least privilege, and appropriate use across physical, cloud virtual desktops, servers, and services in the cloud. So we do this in a couple of different ways. First and foremost, by means of connectors, which are an industry-unique technology that enumerates instances in the cloud and virtual environments for management. We also accomplish this by means of our agents. We have agents for our vulnerability management solution, as well as our least privileged technology that can be deployed in the cloud for real-time management. We also offer an API for our password vaulting solution, PowerBroker Password Safe. And we have cloud offerings, such as Beyond SaaS, which provides you with vulnerability assessment, web application scanning, and privileged cloud management capabilities. So simply put, by means of the solutions I just mentioned, you can monitor privileged user, session, and file activities for unauthorized access or changes to key files and directories within the cloud. You're able to analyze asset and user behavior to detect, suspect, and malicious activities of insiders and compromised accounts. We're able to provide fine-grained policy controls over what privileged Windows, Mac, Unix, and Linux users can do once they are logged onto a cloud workload or system. And finally, we're able to deliver greater visibility over privileged credential usage across commands and applications to help achieve compliance and security objectives regardless of where the application is deployed. When federal IT systems are left unchecked, they can open paths to sensitive assets and data. Per the Verizon 2016 Data Breach Investigations Report, 50% of all exploitations from system vulnerabilities happen between 10 and 100 days after the vulnerability is published, with the median around 30 days. Even though attacks against IT systems are becoming more sophisticated, most attacks still target known vulnerabilities that can be easily patched, which is why it's critical for a federal agency to have clearly defined and effective patch management strategies. Recently, we all heard about the vulnerability within a widely used OS, which allowed ransomware to spread to about 150 countries and cripple several well-known organizations and a few divisions within various government agencies as well. Something that could have been avoided if a clearly defined and effective patch management strategy was in place. So, are you ready for another scary fact? In the early part of this year, January-February timeframe, ReRes Research of Dallas, Texas, on behalf of BeyondTrust, sent out a short online survey to over 100 federal IT and security professionals to gain insight and perspective on how they approach securing their IT systems and achieve compliance with various federal cybersecurity mandates. Per this survey, 63% report less than fully mature vulnerability remediation programs. In fact, 6% have no remediation plan, and another 14% do only the bare minimum required by compliance mandates. Per the executive order, this will not stand going forward. Federal agencies are mandated to fix known weaknesses, implement a patch management strategy, and implement a configuration management strategy. So what needs to be done to improve the maturity of vulnerability management within an agency? Well, there's 4 things that can be done. First and foremost, to be truly effective, patch management requires intelligent ranking and extensive coverage for common business applications. So said another way, at minimum, the solution should discover any asset with an IP address and its associated vulnerabilities. Step 2, in order to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of an agency patch process, you should also deploy a solution that provides integrated automated patching. It should be able to not only discover and prioritize your vulnerabilities, but integrate with your patching systems like your SCCM and WSUS servers to also remediate the vulnerabilities found within your environment. Step 4, You want to make sure you implement a solution that delivers analytics and trending across the threat lifecycle for multi-dimensional reports on assets, vulnerabilities, attacks, and remediation. Allows this to prioritize patch management based on risk profile. And then finally, scan your environment regularly and frequently for vulnerabilities. Many customers I've spoken to typically only scan once a month, some once a quarter. I strongly advise against this. At minimum, you should be scanning your environment at least once a week, in my opinion. Now, many of you have heard of the DHS Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, or CDM for short. Phase 1 of this program covers endpoint integrity, which involves vulnerability management. For Task Order 2A, Beyond Trust Retina was chosen as the vulnerability management solution. This phase dictates that those who participate within this program continually scan their entire environment within 72 hours for vulnerabilities. Now, you may view this as aggressive or not applicable to your environment, and it may not be. But it shows the importance of frequent vulnerability scans within an enterprise class environment. Therefore, it's critical you have a vulnerability management solution in place that will allow you to see every asset within your environment and their associated risk. Beyond Trust Retina CS is an agentless and agent-based scanning technology designed to discover any asset with an IP address within your environment. So that goes for physical assets, virtual assets, or assets that you may have within the cloud. So with Beyond Trust Retina CS, you're able to reduce the attack surface by identifying vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, malware, and attacks, save time and simplify remediation with integrated patch management capabilities, increase security visibility, and maximize investments by sharing asset, user, and threat data with third-party security systems you already have within your environment. And of course, assure compliance with regulatory standards such as NIST 800-53 and HIPAA, for example. Here are some recommendations that will help you to adhere to the presidential executive order in addition to protect your systems and data. Step 1, you want to mitigate insider threats and the misuse of privileges. So you should adopt a least privilege model by removing admin rights from users and storing all privileged credentials in a secure safe. By enforcing least privilege, this will prevent lateral movement within an organization if a breach does occur. Step 2, deploy an automated password and session management solution that provides secure access control, auditing, alerting, and recording for any privileged account. This will provide segmented access to critical systems, manage passwords, and monitor when tasks and operations are committed to a managed system. Step 3, to improve the efficiency and success of an agency patch process, deploy a solution that provides integrated automated patching. Implementing a solution that delivers analytics and trending across the threat lifecycle for multi-dimensional reports on assets, vulnerabilities, attacks, and remediation allows prioritized patch management based on risk profile. And then finally, step 4, deploy solutions that correlate asset-based risk with user-based activity to gain a more complete picture of risk, gaining needed ranking of the most impactful risk within your environment. Consuming multiple data feeds from in-place solutions into a single console can help mitigate additional costs and reduce complexity. So how can Beyond Trust help? Well, by means of our IT risk management platform, Beyond Insight, we're able to provide you a unified solution that gives you privilege access management and vulnerability management capabilities. So said another way, we're giving you control over your internal and external risk, in addition to helping you achieve compliance. Beyond Insight also has a built-in threat and analytics platform called Clarity, connectors that allow seamless integration with other Tier 1 cybersecurity solutions, and a robust reporting feature that gives you access to over 270 plus CAN reports, in addition to the ability to create custom reports as needed. Beyond Insight has all the characteristics of a successful privilege access management and vulnerability management solution. If you have any further questions or would like a demonstration of our technology to see how it can help you mitigate risk in your environment, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you, and back to you, Tammy.
Hey, thank you so much, Shanta. That was a really great overview. Folks, now we're to another poll here in our presentation. I'm going to put that up on the screen. You know, at Beyond Trust, we're ready to help you with your privilege access and vulnerability management needs. And of course, we'd love to chat with you or take you through your own one-on-one demo of Power Broker and Retina that Shanta just talked about. So if you're interested in hearing a little bit more from one of our security experts, please just let us know by choosing yes in the poll on your screen now. We have some time for a couple of questions. For those of you who might have a question burning in your mind, go ahead and type that into the chat window. We'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have left. Let's give them a second here. So Don, while we're got this poll up on the screen and we're waiting for some other questions to come rolling in, you know, what do you think the most positive aspect of the executive order is, the most useful part of that EO for improving security in the government?
Well, it's hard to pick a single one, so I'm going to do the slippery politician approach and pick two. I think in broad strategic terms, the modernization part is very helpful. As I mentioned during my talk, it's going to be very hard to make that happen because that's a lot more than just technology that has to do with the sales cycle and the procurement practices and so on. But if that can happen, if modernization can really be an ongoing thing, I think that will help a lot in the cybersecurity realm, because first of all, having more modern platforms tend to be less vulnerable, and also it will help to create the culture of early adoption, particularly with cybersecurity technologies. More concrete, specific terms, I think with probably a better chance of immediate payback is the whole mandate to do patch management. This is one of the most chronic issues that crops up constantly, and it's something that everyone agrees needs to be done, but it still remains an issue so widely throughout, not just federal government, but the private sector as well. Having a mandate that digs down into the weeds that much coming from the president, I think will hopefully provide a big impetus to resolving this ongoing chronic problem. So simple answer, modernization and patching.
That's great. That's great. Hey, Shanta, you know, kind of following up on what Don just said about adopting modern technologies and modern cybersecurity solutions, can you talk a little bit about how or if the Beyond Trust solutions can be integrated with other cybersecurity technologies?
Sure. So short answer is yes. By means of our connector technology, we're able to seamlessly integrate with a number of existing tier 1 cybersecurity solutions that customers may already have within their environment, from SIEMs to firewalls to identity access management solutions, things of that nature. All, again, included day one right out of the box by means of our connector technology.
Great. So, hey, Don, you mentioned what, oh, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to build on what Shanta just said. That also plays into the whole security as a team sport mandate from the executive order. You know, there's no company that can do it all, no matter how good you are at what you do. So the ability to integrate with other technologies and to be a good cyber citizen, as well as just, you know, sell your product, I think is a really important aspect of any cybersecurity technology. And that's actually one of the things when we look at new companies, we ask about very early in the process is, you know, what are your integrations with other technologies? How do you play nice in the ecosystem as a whole? So I think that's a really important aspect of what Shanta just said. So anyway, you were going to ask me another question.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask another question. So, you know, you mentioned what you thought the most useful parts of the EO were, you know, for improving security in the government. But what about what's missing? If you could add anything to the EO, what would it be?
Well, this is actually kind of a non-technical piece. When I was running cybersecurity programs, a big chunk of our effort went to the whole compliance regime, just documenting all of that. The issue that I encountered, and actually, quite honestly, part of the reason that I left that line of business was that the agency whose systems you're evaluating is also paying you to do the evaluation. And quite often, in addition to that, the systems that you're evaluating were installed and are being administered by the very company that's paying you your paycheck directly. So you're in a position of A, making the agency look bad if you find too much wrong, and B, making your own company look bad if you find too much wrong. So there were a lot of conflicting pressures to find the weaknesses and document them and bring them to light, but then an opposite pressure not to go too far with this stuff because you might wind up rubbing somebody the wrong way. What I'd like to see is some mechanism for ensuring that the assessment of security programs and security technologies implemented in the government for the purpose of ATOs are somehow separated from the agency itself and are not being done by the very same company responsible for that those implementations. Something along the lines of having DHS do it and having a separate making sure that it's a separate company that's doing the assessments. Perhaps OMB or GAO. In other words, some source other than the company itself, so that there's no conflict of interest there. I think that might also help come up with better assessments that aren't a little bit more objective. So it's not really a technology issue. It's just something that I would add. So.
A big culture issue, which I think we're looking at sort of driving some of those cultural changes through the CEO. So great point. Hey, Shanta, we have a question about how Beyond Trust solutions can be deployed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have a very flexible deployment model. We could be deployed within a customer's environment in one of three ways. So the first way is by means of what we call a software install, which basically means that the customer has existing servers within their environment. Those servers meet our particular specs, and we install our software packages on those existing servers. The other way is by means of an appliance. So we actually offer two appliances. We have a virtual appliance as well as a physical appliance. So I'll speak about the virtual appliance first. Essentially, it's a virtual machine with our software pre-installed. It's hardened and locked down. And it supports two hypervisors today, VMware and Hyper-V with other hypervisors on the roadmap. So that's the second way we could be installed. The third way is by means of our physical appliance. Again, an x86 server. Our software is pre-installed. It's a self-contained device, hardened and locked down. And that's the third way that we could be implemented or deployed within a customer's environment.
Great. Well, guys, we've covered a lot of information for our audience today. I want to thank everyone on the line for joining us. It was a really insightful session, and just such pleasure to have you with us, Don Maclean, and you as well, Shanta. As a reminder to everyone on the line, you'll all be receiving a link to the recording of this presentation via email later this week. It'll come from communications@Beyond Trust. So thanks again. Hope everyone has a wonderful day. And we will see you all at the next webinar. Thanks and take care.
Thanks, Tammy.